yes, keep saying yes, keep saying yes. One of the things I've been doing in my evenings lately is I ask people, how many of you have something going on in your life right now that you feel uncertain about? You're not sure if you should do it or not, whatever. And I am with 1,000 people a night, Keith. So every single time, 1,000 people raise their hand. And then I shout out, just do it.
Right.
Don't think about it. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to be perfectly prepared. Just do it, because you will learn so much more in the doing of it, whether it goes well or mediocre or even not so well, than sitting around and thinking about it. One of my favorite sayings that I use all the time is one that I created a while ago, and that is that one step in the right direction is worth 100 years of thinking about it. And you know what, too, Chris? You're talking about regrets. Here's another quote that I think people really have to realize is that you will never regret what you did as much as what you didn't do.
Yeah.
And I hear my parents, there's not an older person, a senior hardly, on this planet who doesn't do what your parents do and regret about they didn't do this and they didn't do this and they didn't do that.
Yeah.
And if you go for it and you make a mistake, then you know what? You'll make it back.
Yep, I agree. One of my favorite sayings is most people tiptoe through life only to arrive at death's door safely.
Yeah.
And I think it's true. And I totally agree that I'm not an advocate of wild-eyed, harebrained risk, but I am an advocate of anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. And what most people think is anything worth doing is worth doing well or worth doing perfectly. And that's really the way I was taught growing up, is that, pretty is as pretty does. And if you're going to do it, then do it well. And yet when I look at it, everything that I know how to do well today, the first time I did it horrible. And so that's really what you're saying too, and something I admire about you, Harv, is that you're somebody who practices what they preach, and you're saying, one of the things that you're about, for example, in your television show opportunities is, look, I may not do it well, but shoot, I'm willing to go do it poorly, and I'll get better. And I think that's a key thing, is the willingness to make mistakes in terms of a secret almost to wealth or to success, is the willingness to make a mistake, pick yourself up and dust yourself off and say, good, what did I learn?
Absolutely. So let me ask you a couple more questions here. So we've kind of got your background, and it was really good that your parents were frugal. They were decent money managers, and again, here's really something that's interesting from your blueprint, is that you took the parts that worked for you from your parents around the frugality and keeping track and things like that, and you rebelled against the parts that weren't working for them.
Yeah.
And you put those two together, and that's one of the reasons that you're rich, because had you taken on, what I'm saying is that when you get a blueprint, when that's installed in you, you're going to get a lot of information. And it's going to be still up to you whether you take that installation and lock it in or you let it go. Because not everything that is said to you necessarily or you see is what you decide, I'm going to take this in, and this is the way I'm going to live my life.
Yeah. So,
it was really great that you were able to check out what your parents had done with you and then say, this one works, I'll keep it, and this one doesn't work, I'll dump it. And it's the same as I attempt to go with all my students and have them understand, is that, look, you've been installed with information. That's your blueprint. That's your financial thermos. That's just the way it is. And yet you have a right to examine those files like we do and take a look at them and say, listen, the way I'm thinking, write them all down, all that stuff in your head, the way I think about money, wealth, rich people, all these beliefs we talked about here, risk and money management, what do I really think about this? And then check it out and then say, do I really want to think this way about that? Because you have a choice. You can just drop a thought very quickly. As I say to people all the time, Keith, is that it doesn't take ages to change a belief. Again, if you trusted somebody and you trusted them for 20 years, and all of a sudden you found out they screwed you last night by doing something really wicked, tomorrow you don't trust them. How long does it take for you to go from trust to distrust? About 8 seconds as soon as you find out, right?
Right.
So literally you could take a look at a way of thinking and go, look, that just doesn't support me. It's nonsense, and go to something that does work. So anyways, let's talk a little bit about, what I want to talk about is something around the specific kind of thoughts and feelings, or thoughts especially that you have in your head that you believe are what have led you to your financial success. So not strategies here, like you're an expert negotiator, I know that, but what thoughts do you have running around in your head that you believe have been very helpful for you in your success?
I think one of the most key thoughts, and what I'm about to say is going to be somewhat controversial, so let your audience just know that, and let me finish it before they revolt. One of the key thoughts is that money is like a woman. And the thought that I have is that if you don't treat it, if you don't tell it it's important, if you don't treat it like it's important, if you don't tell it it's important, if you don't tell it that it's beautiful every single day, it will leave you. Money is like a man. If you don't stroke it, if you don't tell it that it's important, if you don't tell it that he's a stud and all the things, then he will leave you. Money is like a relationship. Money is like health. In other words, if you ignore health, if you say health is unimportant, and it doesn't really mean that much to me, health will leave you if you don't pay attention to it every single day. And so to me, one of the key thoughts for me is that people who say that money is unimportant, A, don't have any, and B, will lie about other things too. I really do think that money is a fact of life. It is important. I don't think it solves all the world's problems. I don't think it's more important than health. I don't think it's more important than relationships. But I do think it's important, and I think the thought that we have sometimes around the subject of money can actually cause money to leave, or it can become a money attractor. And I know that you talk about some of that same stuff too. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things too is that a lot of people, when they get into a position of when they're not doing as well as they'd like to be doing, they begin to resent the idea of money. So it's like, since I'm not doing so great, I'll just piss on the whole thing, excuse my language. Like, who wants to go through all this stuff? I just be happy with what I've got and I'll make do, and I don't want to even go for it anymore.
It's my karma.
Yeah, exactly, my karma, whatever. But like what you're saying here is and what I'm saying is you can't give up. You don't want to give up because, like you say, they'll lie about other things too, but you'll do that with everything too.
Yep.
Yeah, don't forget that money is one of the ways that you measure your own growth. In other words, it's about who you have to become rich, to become successful enough in any endeavor in order to create wealth from it. So one of the key things that we always talk about with my guys is literally the understanding that you got to keep working on you, keep growing you. And what you're talking about here, money being like a woman, you got to treat it this and do that, is really that money is energy, and you have to treat it like any other energy. You do need to focus on it. Although, let's talk about this for a second. This is important. People ask me this all the time. Do you focus on making money, or do you focus on creating success?
I focus on adding value. The people that I know that are the wealthiest and the people that do the most are the people in terms of earnings. Those people I find are the people who add the most value, and I guess that's a roundabout way of saying what you just said, is that by adding value, they're focusing on success, not only their success, but probably more importantly, the success of the people that they're serving or they're selling to.
I agree 1,000%. I think that most people, it's just really this catch-22, isn't it, for a lot of people? Because I know I was one of those people. It's like, you're stuck. You're financially, you're not doing well. So where's your mind go? It goes to doing better financially. So all you can think about is, how am I going to make some money? I got to pay the rent. I got to be able to do this. I want to go on a vacation. I promised my kids. I don't even have enough right now. Maybe I should borrow, whatever. So you end up focusing on you and making money. And I know for myself, Heath, it's definitely the exact same agreement that you focus on adding value for people. And definitely, for me, it's about creating and focusing on being more successful. In other words, I want things to work. In other words, when a seminar occurs, for example, I want people to walk out of there going, that was like an amazing seminar, incredible.
Yeah.
And of course, I ask what the numbers were. I say, well, how do we do financially? Do we make any money? Like, what was our numbers? But, I don't even ask the numbers to find out what we did that time. I ask the numbers to find out if we had a successful event compared to what we've had. Like, for example, if I do an event where there's 1,000 people in the room and I do X amount of numbers revenue per person, then it's not the number. I don't even add it up. I just want to compare how I'm doing in comparison to how we have been doing, and are we growing or are we going down, and what's the correction that needs to be made? And from my own point of view. And of course, when I walk into any seminar, I'm only going there whether it's 200 or 1,000 or 2,000. Is can we change some people's lives tonight? Yeah. And right now, like again, the publisher is saying we want something new from you. It's got to be about money, but it's got to be this. It's got to be different. And my feeling is that we can change even more people's lives with this money blueprint. It will just stay there for a bit, And so literally, I agree with you 1,000%. For everybody, the lesson is, put your attention on helping others. One of the things, again, I do in the evening is, Keith, is I let people know that one of the homeworks that they have, and again, if you haven't been to the evening for a while, I want you to come back and so you can see it, but one of the homeworks that we give people in this playing the money game to win is that to create a way, starting immediately as fast as possible, to help 10 times as many people as you're helping now. So what that means is that, again, one of the definitions we use of an entrepreneur or a business person is a person who solves problems for profit or for pay. So what that means is your job is to be what? A problem solver. And so you need to solve more problems for more people. And you create a system or a leverage system or a strategy for doing that. So if if you have a database right now of 1,000 people and you're helping 1,000 people, then you need to get a database of 10,000 people as quickly as possible. If you have 10,000, make it 100,000. If you have a store with 20 people walking in a day and buying something, you got to have 200 people walking in a day. So how can I do that in my store? Have 10 stores. So literally, it's like you say, it's about believing in what you do, and that's another big one, isn't it?
Yes.
Believing in what you do, knowing that you're really solving people's problems, choosing to do that, and choosing to solve them in a much bigger way.
I think you've hit on something on this whole success. The way you're describing success is I'll take it one step further and apply it to me, and that is, to me, this whole business of adding value is about growth. It's about a solutions orientation, a solutions focus. And every time I focus on growth, I wind up getting excited. And every time I focus on my problems, I wind up kind of getting depressed.
Well, in our wizard training, we say focus on what you want, not on what you don't want.
Yeah, I agree. So I mean, to me, this whole thing around success is, I mean, to me, money is the applause that you get from customers, and I mean, the louder the applause, the more money you're going to get, and that all has to do with adding value and growing and a solutions orientation.
So let me ask you this question. So many people have obstacles in their life. We all have obstacles in our lives. Give us an example of what runs through your head when an obstacle comes in front of you, problems come in front of you. What goes through your head when you're in front of challenges like that?
Probably the main thing that goes through my head is I look on the other side of the obstacle and try to figure out if leaping this thing is where I want to end up. In other words, every time an obstacle comes up, for me, there's going to be a certain amount of energy and a certain amount of effort and time and sometimes investment, maybe in terms of money or otherwise, that has to go into try to solving this particular problem. And some problems are that might come up are simply not worth the effort. For example, in one of the companies that I own, I recently had somebody that was stealing money from me. And they wound up over a period of maybe 75 or 100 days. They clipped me for maybe $3,000, $3,500. I had to make the choice, and I found out, and I fired them, and I had to make the choice as to whether or not I was going to pursue that particular problem. And ultimately, I said, you know what, I'm going to do it. Even though I know that I'll never get my money back, I'm unwilling to let them simply walk away scot-free. And so I hired the lawyers and reported it to the police. In fact, today I was in court for an hour and a half, And so that wasn't really an obstacle as much as it was.
So what's the thinking behind that, Keith? So what is it about you? What's the thinking behind that? Is it about, would you say that it's about making certain that people understand about integrity? Would you say something to that effect?
I think that's part of it, but I think part of it, and I used to not do
holding
this.
people accountable? What is it for you?
Yeah, and that's part of it too. I used to not do this. This is a relatively recent behavior pattern because I've owned businesses for all my life, and I own a bunch of them, and I've done a lot of investing. And just in the last 4 or 5 years, I've probably said, you know what, I'm unwilling to simply lay down and take it anymore when people do that to me. And so I've become much more aggressive. On the other hand, I've got another situation where I did a deal with a guy, and he clipped me for a lot of money, way into 6 figures, and he took bankruptcy. And I could fight the bankruptcy, but that's one and my attorneys told me it would cost probably over $100,000 to fight. And I ultimately said, you know what, I'm unwilling to spend that money and that time and effort on that one. So, it feels like when you ask me that question, when you ask me that question, I mean, my brain starts scanning, and I say, you know what, sometimes I choose to spend the time and the energy to leap the obstacle or solve the problem, and other times I say, you know what, lesson learned, move on.
So one of the ways that we can summarize that might be is that you focus on the bigger things, and for the most part,
yes,
you choose whether it's worth getting into. So another way of saying that is choose your battles wisely.
Yep.
And a lot of people listening to this call right now, I bet you, they don't really take a look at the energy necessary in most battles, if you want to call it that way, in most situations. And plus, a lot of our guys haven't heard me talk about this, but I used to talk about this all the time, and it's called the law of maintenance. And what that means is that everything you get involved in, everything you say yes to, there's not only going to be what it is, there's going to be all this before it and after it and maintaining it. So it's like, it's almost like having getting a dog, okay? You have to think every situation is like you're getting a dog. Oh, my God, it's so cute. It's a little puppy. I want one of those things. I got to have it. And then it's great. It's so playful, and I love playing with it. And then you got to go out of town, and it's like, uh-oh, now what do I do, right? And then you got to go get the food. So I'm not saying anything negative about it, but I say there's maintenance to all energy. So check that out. I want to, I guess, add my 2 cents to that. And I would say that when obstacles come before me, I used to not do this when I was broke, but now I can see one of the biggest differences in the way I think now from when I was broke is that when obstacles are in front of me, of course they're not comfortable, but I do take a look at it and go, listen, if this is going to take you out, anything will take you out. However, you got to be bigger than your problems. You teach that. You got to be bigger than this. And again, that there's no problem unless I make it a problem, that the situation is not a problem until I deem it so by my perception and my meaning of it. And so I'm not going to make this a huge problem. I'm just going to, and again, one of the biggest things for me is understanding that one of the differences between rich people and poor people is that rich people are willing to handle the big problems as they come up, and whereas poor people get taken out by them. And so let me ask you a question here. Does that make sense at all?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%.
Let me ask you a question. What would you say is a way that you think now that you are very wealthy versus when, you had times when you weren't doing too good? What is a different one way that you think very differently? You can look back and go, you know what? When I was not doing well, I thought this way. But now that I'm doing well, I don't think that way. I think this way.
One of the key things I think, and the way I think today, is because I have made a bunch of money and lost it and then made a bunch of money again, I have figured out that there's 2 different skill sets. One is how to make it. The other one is how to keep it.
Right.
And I think I have always been very good at making money. In fact, by the time I was 30, I was a multi-millionaire, and by the time I was 35, I was well over $20 million of cash in my hip pocket. So I had a lot of money at a very early age. And one of the things that I thought at that time was I got confused about the difference between skill and luck. And on the one hand, I did have a lot of skill, and I still have a lot of skill. But on the other hand, at the time I was making in my 30s when I was making an enormous sum of money, I was also very lucky. and I'm much more aware today, and I'm still lucky. I'm not saying that luck doesn't play a part, but I'm much more cognizant of realizing that luck is not a sustainable strategy for success. In other words, repeatedly relying on luck, even though I know that there's an element of luck in everything. But a lot of times I think we make our own luck. So today I would say, because I'm the age I am, because I've been through a bankruptcy, a personal bankruptcy when I was in 1991, where I had lost all my money because I had invested in real estate in Texas and in the 1980s. And if you invested in real estate in Texas in the 1980s, and I had about $200 million worth of real estate in the 1980s, and that caused a severe problem. That I was personally liable on all that debt, and it was a huge mess. And one of the things I came out of that with was, you asked about differences in thoughts. One obviously is that recognize the difference between making it and keeping it. I'd say another crucial thought. And this is something I think that fouled me up, and actually was very depressing. It was very depressing. It was a horrible time to be me, Harv, in 1991. And one of the thoughts that I had leading into that was that my net worth and my self-worth were the same thing. And I had to do a lot of work on that to jump over that hurdle. And basically I came out the other side saying, wait a second, and you talk about this in your book a lot. I mean, what I do does not define who I be. Who I am as a person and as a human being and as a man and as a husband and a father has nothing to do with how much money I have. And so I had to do a lot of work on separating my self-worth and my net worth, and it's still a struggle. I mean, I won't deny that. I still get fed by success, but I try not to be a glutton on it, if that makes sense.
It does, and it's a great point, because literally what happens is that people who combine those, self-worth and net worth, what happens is then you go up and down like a yo-yo. When your money's good, you're good. When your money's down, you're down. And here's the problem. It's the law of momentum, isn't it?
Yep.
So what happens is if things are going well, you're feeling great about yourself, and it's kind of normal to do that, and you're really on a roll, and you're willing to take action and stuff. But if you really attach the two when things aren't going so great, then you feel crummy, you don't want to do anything, you don't want to take action, you don't want to talk to anybody. And this is where like our warrior trainings and things like that need to come into play. This is where you need to take control of your own mind and manage your mind so that it's not taking you out. Because any discussion about your self-worth is a mental, excuse my way of saying this, is simply mental masturbation. There is no discussion about self-worth. One of the questions that someone asked here along the same lines, Linda, had said that, Harv, I'm learning to admire rich and successful people, but I'm having a hard time believing I can be one of them. And she basically says that it's something that only certain people are smart enough and lucky enough to do. And she doesn't really understand whether she deserves it or not. And so it's along the same thing. So to Linda, one of the things I want to say, and you'll hopefully have something to add to it, is that I believe this, that if you grow yourself, if you just work on growing you and being the best you can be, and work on yourself every day, whether it's meditation, whether it's your health and fitness, whether it's again, learning and growing. If you work on you and your own mind and your knowledge and things like that, again, every master was once a disaster. If you work on you, you'll feel good enough about yourself and just who you are that you will attract a lot more opportunities to you. Because a lot of people, isn't it true, Keith, and don't you see this all the time, because you teach also, that people come up to you and they want to do business with you, but they got like the worst energy on the planet, and you wouldn't go near them. You don't want to be infected by them. You know what I'm saying? Because they look down, and we have a program called